Hey, what you reading for?
There is a chance, there is a chance that I am a book snob. That's not a chance, I mean, it's a fact at this point. And at this point in my life, there's not a lot I can do about it. I am who I am. It's not going to change. But what I can do is I can stay vigilant and I can make a concerted effort to avoid being an insufferable book snob. I'll still be a book snob, but I'll be a lovable, sufferable book snob. Now, in order to do this, I have identified 4 patterns, 4 behavioral traits, if you will, that differentiate between an insufferable book snob, which I don't want to be, and a lovable, sufferable book snob, which is okay. So I'm going to go over these 4 points with you, hopefully get some feedback, and hopefully we'll learn and we'll grow together. Quick reminder to hit the like button and subscribe. That helps other book enthusiasts find this channel and helps this channel grow, and I do appreciate it. So let's jump in and have a look at these 4 behavioral points. Point number 1, avoid one-upsmanship. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but you tell somebody about a book you've just read, a book you've just enjoyed. For example, oh, I've just read Looking Glass Sound by Karim Ward. I thought it was excellent. And the person responds to you by saying, oh yes, that was good. It's not as good as her other books. It's not as good as Sundial. It's not as good as Raw Blood or Little Eve. But yeah, it's a good book. Right? Or they'll think of they'll take the book that you've just mentioned and they'll think of a similar book, but of course that other book is so much better. Right? Like, oh, I've just read Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. Wow, I really love that book. And then the insufferable book snob will say, oh yes, that's good, but if you like that one, you should read Night of the Hunter by Davis Grubb. It's like Blood Meridian, but so much better. It's like, hey, relax, you know? It's not always a competition. So, avoid one-upsmanship. Talking about similar books or other books from that author, that's valid feedback, that's a valid information, but it doesn't have to be the first thing you say, right? So avoid one-upsmanship. Second point, books are not in competition with movies. For example, someone will say to you, oh, I've just seen, oh, I love horror movies. Oh, great. My favorite is Rosemary's Baby. And then the insufferable book snob will say to you, oh yes, but it's not as good as the book. Okay, maybe it's not as good as the book, and maybe that's valid information or valid feedback, but it doesn't have to be the first thing you say, right? We can discuss the movie, talk about what's good about that movie, what we liked, and then maybe if it comes up, oh, by the way, the book is also really good. It doesn't have to be the first thing you say. And also, incidentally, the book is not always better than the movie. Speaking of horror, I can think of off the top of my head 5 examples where I prefer the movie to the book. For example, Jaws, for example. I like the movie much more than I like the book. And also Dead Ringers by David Cronenberg. Growing up, that was a very important movie to me. I love that movie. And the book, not so great. And also, there are many examples. I could go on and on. Point number 3, and this one I struggle with quite a bit. Don't panic when you meet someone who hasn't heard of an author you love. There are so many great writers, so many great books. We can't all have heard of all of them, right? Recently, there's a used bookstore down the street from where I live, and recently I took some books there to exchange with them, and I brought in Soviet Milk, which is a big hit here in Latvia where I live. So I said, oh, can I trade this in? She said, oh, great, Soviet Milk, we can definitely sell that, sure. And then I showed her this. I showed her the Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, Pulitzer Prize winner of the Women's Prize for Fiction. And she said, oh, fantastic. I've been meaning to read this. Yeah, this is great. So I was on a roll, right? And I pulled this out. And I've got this too, right? Shirley Jackson short story collection. And she takes the book and she looks at it and she doesn't react with the enthusiasm I had expected. And she tells me, yeah, I don't know this author. And I had to concentrate and focus to not panic. And I just had to remember to breathe. And I mean, she works at a bookstore. She's never heard of Shirley Jackson, right? But hey, okay, I've heard of everything. And so I focused, I concentrated, and I said, oh, maybe you've heard of, some of her short stories like The Lottery. She said, oh, yeah, of course, I know The Lottery. Or her novel, The Haunting of Hill House. Oh, of course, I know The Haunting of Hill House, she said. I don't know if she was being truthful, or maybe she just saw the panic in my eyes and wanted to calm me down. But that was a good example where I could have reacted better. So she hasn't heard of Shirley Jackson. Okay. It's not the end of the world, right? It's no big deal. I mean, it's kind of a big deal. I mean, Shirley Jackson is one of the best American writers of the 20th century. But hey, this is not America, this is Latvia. The fact that she knows who Barbara Kingsolver is already, quite an accomplishment. Point number 4. Popular doesn't necessarily mean bad. There is a lot of benefit actually to reading popular books. There is something that's quite nice about that reading gives us. It allows us to have a shared experience. For example, if you grow up in the United States, chances are very high that you have read To Kill a Mockingbird or Lord of the Flies. So you meet someone decades later in another part of the world. You don't know that person, but you know that you have this shared experience in common, right? You can talk about Lord of the Flies or To Kill a Mockingbird. You've had this shared experience, so there is quite a benefit to reading popular books. So the other day, I'm in a beer garden and I'm waiting for my friend, and she shows up. And she's carrying with her a Dan Brown book. Now I had a few options as to how I could react. I could say nothing. I could ask her what she thinks of the book. I didn't have to pretend that I had just received an important phone call and I had to rush off and I'm needed in an emergency at the animal shelter. That was an option, but that's probably not the best option, right? So she's reading Dan Brown, maybe she's curious. Maybe a friend recommended to her. It doesn't mean that she's a bad person, right? We can still be friends. I read popular books too. I read books because they get a buzz. I read bestsellers. Yeah, I don't read Dan Brown, obviously, but just because she has a popular book with her doesn't mean we can't be friends, right? So, in summation, avoid one-upsmanship. It's not a competition. Secondly, books and movies are not in competition with each other. And if you do prefer the book, that's fine, but it doesn't have to be the first thing you say in response. Don't panic when someone hasn't heard of or hasn't read a particular book. For that matter, don't panic if they don't like an author that you love. And lastly, popular doesn't necessarily mean bad. Now, I understand these four concepts. I just have to stay vigilant when I meet people, when I interact with people, when I interact with with readers. Keep those in mind. And I can still be a book snob, but I don't have to be an insufferable book snob. So what are your thoughts on the difference between an insufferable book snob and a lovable, sufferable book snob? Are there some behavioral traits, tendencies that I need to be aware of? And obviously this is for real life. Here on booktube I'm perfectly happy playing the persona of an insufferable book snob, but in real life I'm not. I'm a book snob, but I'm a lovable, sufferable book snob most of the time. Yeah. As long as I stay vigilant on these 4 points, I think I can do it. I think I can continue being a book snob and yet still be sufferable.